You are listening to the Reformed Initiative podcast, where we analyze and discuss Roman Catholic theology and practice from an evangelical perspective. My name is Clay Kennard. I'm sitting in the city center of Rome, joined by my colleagues and brothers in Christ, Dr. Leonardo Di Chirico and Reed Carr. Brothers, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you, Clay.
Yep, thanks, Clay.
Yep. Now, it's good to be with you. We're not sitting together. We're joined virtually, but we're all in the city. And there's a lot happening in our city right now. As our listeners know, it's the year of Jubilee. We just finished the Holy Week and Good Friday and Easter. And so there's a lot of religious activity taking place in the city of Rome these last few days. And then, as everyone is well aware, the Pope has passed away. Pope Francis passed away yesterday morning, Monday morning on the 21st, about 7:50 something, I think, in the morning. He passed away from a stroke, if I'm not mistaken, that also led to heart failure, I assume. So obviously that is what we want to talk about. Reed, is there anything you want to add in? I'm sure perhaps you're over there by the Vatican. Have you noticed crowds gathering? Have you seen an influx in tourists in the last 24 hours?
This was on the news. They rang the bell of St. Peter's Basilica 88 times to signify the 88 years of Pope Francis's life. And, it's interesting because, as you said, there's the year of Jubilee. So a lot of people are here already, and especially for Holy Week and for Easter. And so it was added an interesting element to the week's festivities, even though it happened, just after Easter, but still a lot of pilgrims here. I think a lot of people have been writing me, from the States and friends and saying, "Oh, I bet it's crazy there." And interestingly enough, I wouldn't say it's crazy. I think that you also kind of see when something like this happens how really culturally Catholic I believe people are. It is a big deal. It's a big event. But yesterday was Pasquetta, which means Little Easter here in Italy. So people were, life kind of goes on, and certainly whenever the new conclave is called, it will be a big story. It is a big deal when the head of the Catholic Church, the Pope, passes away. But it's just kind of something that people talk about. I wouldn't say a whole different buzz as far as the feel.
Yeah, perhaps something bigger will happen on Saturday when the funerals will take place. And I read that they expect 300,000 people to come. Not as many as the funerals of John Paul II, when they say 2 million people joined in, but 300,000 in St. Peter's Square. In itself, it's nonetheless it's a big crowd.
Now, Leo, we read today his last testimony where he said he would like to be buried in one of the 4 papal basilicas, not at St. Peter's, but at St. Mary Major. When will that take place? Does that take place immediately after the funeral? Is there a procession to take him there, or is there a period of him his body residing at St. Peter's first? How is that going to work?
Well, after the funeral, I think the next day there's going to be the burial, and I don't know if the preparation for the tomb, how much time it will take for the tomb to be prepared. And so that depends on the timing depends on various factors. But the sooner, I think after the funeral, I think they will aim at burying him the sooner, as soon as possible. And then, of course, because then it's the beginning of the next phase, that is the conclave. And so once buried, although they may bury him in a provisional not in the permanent space, but the provisional tomb not yet been finished. But it is going to be settled before the conclave takes place, because then it's a different chapter of the life of the Roman Church. And since they want to begin the conclave on the 5th of May, that means that they have a week or so to move the body from St. Peter's to St. Mary Major.
We spoke about the coming conclave. It's been at least over a month now. When Pope Francis originally went into the hospital, and it looked like he may not make it out of the hospital. He did, of course, as we know. But we can direct our listeners to a couple episodes ago when we discussed, what the conclave would look like, possible next candidates. But just very, very briefly, because it is now, more relevant. Leo, are there any, since in the last month or two, have any names emerged more clearly as far as possible next popes than when we spoke about it, a month and a half ago?
Yeah. Well, it's the topic of the so-called congregations, that is the meetings, pre-conclave meetings of cardinals. The first one happened this morning, and they decided the date of the funerals and the next steps. And at one point, they're going to discuss not the single candidates, but the profile, and what cardinals expect the new pope will have to do, and who's going to be, as far as the general traits of his position and agenda, and what are the main directions that the church needs to take. Then, according to this discussion, after these discussions, then the real ballots will take place in the Sistine Chapel. And I think that depending on the way in which these discussions go, then the candidate will come up. My impression, if I can say this, is that we're not expecting a radical change. The pendulum swinging radically backwards to a traditionalist pope or conservative pope. I don't think that this is going to happen. I don't think either that a more radical pope is going to be elected, or a Francis-like figure is going to be elected. But I think that they will kind of select someone who is going to be a more moderate pope than Pope Francis, less radical, and able to, in a way, carry on the legacy of Pope Francis, but with more capabilities of running the church and bringing some healing and reconciliation in the church, rather than fostering disruptions and confusions and ambiguity. So within the line set by Pope Francis, but not as a radical Franciscan next pope, rather more moderate, more diplomatic, more a man of capable of governing the complexity of the Roman Church.
Less shock factor, should we say?
Yeah, I mean, someone who would settle things after 12, 13 years of ongoing disruption brought about by Pope Francis. And I think the time is for a season of peace and calming down of tensions. And I think they will look at a candidate like this.
Will that mean bringing more doctrinal clarity, or avoiding the doctrinal issues and just keeping the status quo?
I think the Jesuit nature of Pope Francis made it such evident that his positions were always confused, blurred, ambiguous, unclear. I think the next one is going to be someone who will speak with more, at least, intelligibility, because Pope Francis, nobody really knew what he was at when he talked about things in this occasional conversations during flights or during interviews given to journalists. His ways of expressing has often been unclear. I think they will make sure that the next pope is going to be a better communicator, not in the sense that Francis was not a good communicator, but a more clear communicator. He was a good communicator in the sense that he was able to speak the language of gestures rather than words. But I think the next one is going to have they're going to expect him to be more, at least capable of using more precise language.
So what cardinals fit that bill?
I think that there are, the list is depends on the source you're reading, but I think Cardinal Tagle, the Filipino cardinal, is a profile that is much talked about. Is a young cardinal from Manila, the Philippines. He's in the line of Pope Francis. He's an historian of the Second Vatican Council. He's at the head of Propaganda Fide, the missions dicastery of the Catholic Church. He has some experience of government and also in the Vatican Curia. He could be a candidate, but also much talk revolves around the Cardinal Aveline from Marseille, France. He's a French cardinal, but he was born in Algeria, apparently speaks Arabic, and so he's considered as a kind of a bridge between different Mediterranean cultures, both European and Northern African, and much in line with this dialogue that Francis has been undertaking with Islam. And so it could be another candidate. Or if these two fail to receive support, maybe a more diplomatic candidate coming from the diplomacy, and therefore Cardinal Parolin, the present day Secretary of State, could be a third candidate in case the first two don't advance in receiving votes. But who knows?
I've seen, and we mentioned in the past that perhaps a likely next papal name is John the 24th. And even Pope Francis had suggested that and indicated. What does that mean? When he says John the 24th, why is that significant, and what does that carry with it?
Yeah, of course, he couldn't have said, I would like to have a Francis II, because that would be too egocentric and self-centered. But the next Pope he likes to be associated with is John the 23rd. The good Pope, the Pope of the people, the Pope who was able to be approachable, the Pope who convened the Council, Second Vatican Council, who wanted change, who wanted renewal. And I think that is what is encapsulated in the name John the 24th, an approachable pastoral Pope, bringing about change, but not as a abrupt revolution, but rather in the spirit of updating and ressourcement and development. And John the 23rd kind of embodied that profile. And I think this is what Francis had in mind when he talked about his desire for John 24th to be elected.
Well, we will see, obviously. Let's change gears just a little bit and directions and talk about how evangelicals should talk about the Pope's passing. There's a lot of comments online, obviously, and when someone passes, you want to be respectful, but you also want to be clear in the things that you say and responsible. So as an evangelical thinks about and talks about Pope Francis, how should they go about that, and what is important to keep in mind when thinking about that?
Leo's pointing at me for this one. Well, I mean, I have my own questions here. For example, some of the questions I've been asked by other evangelicals and evangelical leaders is, what can we learn from Pope Francis? And so, okay, I'm sure we can reflect on that part. My initial response is, sure, we can probably look to Pope Francis and find some things that we could learn. But why do we need to look to Pope Francis to learn things? I mean, do we really need to do that? Sure, we could look at anybody. But that's a question that let's come back to that together, I think. Another thing we're seeing online is evangelical leaders posting pictures of themselves with the Pope and sharing fond memories or praising certain aspects of Pope Francis. And so that, I think, is a little bit concerning. In fact, I addressed that on my own social media. And the way I did that was first by sharing a quote from Pope Francis's last testimony, where he describes where he wants to be buried. And I quoted him where he said, "I've always entrusted myself to the Mother of our Lord, the Blessed Virgin Mary." And so this led me to basically make my own comment about some of the evangelical engagement I'm seeing online that is very positive towards the legacy Pope Francis has left behind. And so what I wrote is this: death is a reality we all must face. And here in Rome, obviously, the passing of Pope Francis is on everyone's lips. Understandably, evangelical leaders are offering condolences and reflecting on their personal encounters with him. Yet it is both puzzling and concerning to see some evangelical leaders prominently posting pictures of themselves with Pope Francis and praising his heart. Such posts risk appearing more like self-promotion than thoughtful reflection. We should indeed acknowledge and grieve the death of any individual with compassion and dignity. At the same time, we must not lose sight of the central truths of the gospel. Pope Francis, despite his widely recognized humanitarian concerns, proclaimed a message fundamentally at odds with the biblical gospel, a message which did not affirm salvation by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, according to Scripture alone. Francis himself publicly entrusted his soul to another mediator besides Christ, underscoring a profound theological divide that we cannot and must not overlook, even in moments of mourning and reflection. So I'll ask you, brothers, what your thoughts are on that statement, and then we can return back to my initial question. Do we really need to look for positive things that we can learn as evangelicals from Pope Francis, or should we really spend this time underlining and highlighting the issues, especially considering the evangelical attraction not only to Pope Francis, but also to Roman Catholicism that we are seeing lately?
Yeah, I think, Clay, I totally agree with you with your point in your article. There is a temptation to be very selective and sentimental, and choosing to focus on one little aspect and overshadowing or forgetting the complexity of a personality like Pope Francis, and also the risk of self-promotion is very, very high. People, they don't want to talk about Francis, they want to talk about themselves. and so presenting themselves as cool, having had the privilege of meeting with Pope Francis and being at his side. And so I think that reflects a kind of widespread evangelical shallowness and superficiality in addressing the responsibility of understanding the times and interpreting the times. That is a biblical mandate that we all have. You understand the times. You know when the sun dawns and when the sun is when the sky is red. You understand what kind of day is it, and yet you don't understand the times that you're living in. And I think that much of our social media saturated culture is based on fragments, emotional fragments, instead of attempting at looking at the what God has been doing, what God is doing, and then interpreting reality according to biblical parameters. This man, I agree with you, we should pay respect to all individuals, but he's been the man who has, who have taken for himself the title of Vicar of Christ and Universal Pastor of the Church, head of the Vatican State, and at the same time, presenting himself as having a servant heart and so on. So we need to address these complex features of the Pope rather than wanting to find a selfie opportunity or a photo opportunity for ourselves. And of course, in order to do that, you need to engage Roman Catholic realities, the ways that many evangelicals are not willing to do, and yet they pretend they can speak about Pope Francis as the good man or the great example of the champion of so and so. I think that shows the degree of superficiality that we are living in, and the lack of reference points in the evangelical world, whereas many people are talking about themselves, but very few people are actually trying to help us to shape our understanding on what these 12, 13 years of Francis's pontificate have been.
And we're seeing this even at high levels. So like the General Secretary of the World Evangelical Alliance.
There's no at the moment they're searching for one, but they put up a statement, talking about understandably, the good things that Pope Francis did, but lacking spiritual, theological, biblical depth, and and not helping the wider evangelical constituency to assess an important legacy like the one that Pope Francis left to the church and the world as a whole.
I think certainly you can be respectful to someone passing, and you must, but at the same time, I think it's unhelpful, especially in an evangelical world, to go to the other extreme and praise the individual in a way that is unhelpful or in a way that is confusing. Clay, you were asking about, should we, what can we learn from Francis? And, when did Joy of the Gospel come out? 2015, and shortly after his, Leo, your mic is, anyway, it came out early in his papacy, but, that's when he talked about the church needs to be a field hospital. It needs to be outward looking. It doesn't need to be inward looking. So a place for the wounded. And of course that is good imagery. It's good. It's something that the church should be. But even there, you have to redefine everything. You have to. He wasn't talking about a church outward looking in the sense that, a church that is faithful to proclaiming the biblical gospel talks about that. So behind that was a social gospel,
interfaith dialogue.
Yeah. So all of that. So even like trying to find something that you could agree on is really it would be so superficial as to be unhelpful. And yeah, I mean, I think about always. I guess it was 2018. We've talked about it on here before a long time ago, when Pope Francis, was in the periphery of Rome at a parish, a parochial church, and a little boy who had just lost his dad asked him a question about where his dad is. Pope Francis was fielding questions from the kids that were present there doing their catechism. And the boy couldn't have been more than about 10 and, asked Pope Francis about where his dad was, but he was an atheist. He was a non-believer, but he did have his kids baptized. And, Pope Francis told the kid, well, look, I mean, it's very difficult to have your children baptized if you're an atheist. So surely your dad was a good man, and surely he is in heaven. So, encouraged the boy to pray to his dad, to talk to his dad. And so, I mean, that's harmful, that's awful anti-gospel theology, nothing at all to celebrate. So yeah, I mean, you gotta find the balance of being responsibly respectful, but not irresponsibly celebrating, a man who, theologically speaking, at least doctrinally speaking, like Leo said, who calls himself the vicar of Christ, speaks on Christ's behalf, shepherds a church, shepherds more than 1 billion people worldwide away from the biblical gospel. And in Pope Francis's case, it was just so clearly away from the biblical gospel. So you had to consider that as we talk about it, and maybe those conversations are reserved for the people who ask us, what do you think? But yeah, it's
I think there's also a bigger framework. One thing is to talk about Pope Francis, and we see that many in our constituency are confused. They selectively choose bits and pieces of what they have heard about Pope Francis, what they've seen, and they sentimentalize them. And then there's the bigger picture of the lack of understanding of what Catholicism is all about, what is going through, what is at stake with the Roman Catholic Church. And so if interpreting Francis is a difficult task, and we see many voices coming up telling little fragments but not grasping the picture, if you put this thing in the wider picture of an evangelical understanding of Catholicism, we see much confusion, and again, much superficiality, much sentimentalism. And so you add a sentimental view and selective view and shallow view of Catholicism, you add this aspect to a selective view of Pope Francis, the result is a multiplication of fragmented understanding and superficial analysis. And I think that reflects the state where we are at, the lack of spiritual discernment, the lack of theological depth, the lack of the interpretation of the signs of the times, and whereby everybody is entitled to speak and to speak thinking that he or she or they know what they're talking about, and yet they prove that they're actually talking fragments and little pieces, not grasping anything of what is at stake in what they're talking about. So this podcast is actually we are often repeating this refrain, this chorus, so to speak, that we are living in a time when the spiritual discernment about the big realities of the religious world, uh, ecumenism, the World Council of Churches, the Roman Catholic Church, these things, most people don't have a clue of what they're talking about. And yet there is an explosion of the desire to talk about everything, and then resulting in much confusion. So this is not to be pessimistic, but just to say that in reality, we're witnessing to the uh, a phenomenon that is not only applicable to Pope Francis now that is passed away, but has more general implications about the bigger picture.
So if we had to just summarize what we've said here in the last several minutes, and somebody's like, give me a soundbite for, as an evangelical, how I can respectfully but also responsibly, talk about this, or if we don't know what we're talking about, should we just keep our mouth shut, or what would be one piece of advice?
Well, in interpreting reality, we all need reference points, and we're not self-made men or women. We're not born out of the blue. We need reliable sources. That is what is implied in our evangelical Protestant biblical faith, going back to sources and listening to the credible voices, and then making our own minds in the context of an ongoing conversation in the church. That has been what has been lacking in different analysis. The reality is that in most conferences, meetings, churches, people don't talk about Catholicism. And so what should we expect if I was, we talked about this in earlier episodes. I was at the Lausanne Fourth Congress in Seoul, and for 7 days we had hundreds of sessions, and no one dedicated to Catholicism in the program. So what is that program saying to us? That the whole family of evangelicals, although talking about different topics, is not really interested in addressing or going, in other conferences, even the US or the Western world, when the people talk about the Reformation legacy, or the gospel, the challenges, no one is actually mentioning Catholicism. And so the result is that there is a lack of understanding and analysis and depth. And so a podcast like this is a source. Books, articles are all important to listen to, and also when we deal with Catholicism, there is a need for people just to always to listen to understand what they listen in the context of the Roman Catholic tension. Sometimes they listen to one voice more on the Roman side. Other times they listen more to a voice on the Catholic side. There is a need to be always aware of the tension and the flexibility of that relationship. And so we need more reliable guides, more reliable resources, and we need to pay more attention to the task of developing an evangelical view of Catholicism.
Clay, do you have any final thoughts?
I don't. I mean, other than how would you guys respond to this question? Do we as evangelicals need to look at Pope Francis and try to figure out what we can learn from him, positively speaking? I mean, yes, we need to care for the environment. We need to promote justice. We need to call out human trafficking and violations against religious liberties around the world. Those are obviously things that we would say we agree with. But in a time like this, where there is this sentimentalism, do we really need to be doing that? That's my question.
I would expand the question to the following: do we need to learn something from Karl Marx? Do we need to learn something from the Dalai Lama?
Yeah.
Do we need to learn something from Donald Trump? Do we need to learn something from, whoever?
Right.
And the question is, and the answer is, of course, we need to reflect on people's lives, but this insistence that we have to learn from others oftentimes downplays the fact that what we really need to learn from is from the Word of God, embodied by faithful men and women throughout history. Of course, we need to be respectful. Of course, we need to gain insights from people's lives. But this obsession to say what we can learn, and as if we're depending on that learning, I think that's another matter.
Yeah.
That would be stretchable to all, people, even those who are. What we can learn from the Imam of Al-Azhar in Egypt, or the Buddhist leaders, or the politicians. In a sense, yes, we have to learn from everybody, but not implying that because we can learn something, that means that the person we're talking about is to be elevated as a kind of a semi-brotherly status, semi-Christian status.
Yeah, those are my feelings.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if we're talking about Laudato Si, his encyclical on taking care of the environment, or, I mean, how many people out there, how many examples out there, or how many people would say, no, we need to go and destroy the environment? And, I think I can be both respectful about Pope Francis, but also not look to him in any way whatsoever as an example that I want to emulate or follow or learn from, just for the reasons I gave before. And because everything behind everything that he wrote, as far as I can tell, was not leading people towards the gospel in any way, but leading them away from a true understanding of what it means to have a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. So can be respectful, sympathetic to someone who mourns that loss, but in no way would I look to Pope Francis in any way I think I can think of for something that I would want to emulate.
Yeah.
So I think both of those things can be true at the same time.
Yeah. One simple example, he's often praised as someone who avoided doctrinal disputes because he wanted to focus on unity, he wanted to focus on brotherhood, he wanted to focus on peace. If we remember Christ's words in John 14:6, he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. But just last fall, when Pope Francis was in the Asia Pacific region, I think possibly in Singapore, and speaking to, if I'm not mistaken, also a group of youth, he says, and I quote, all religions are path to God. I will use an analogy. They are like different languages that express the divine. And then he elaborated that by saying, quote, there is only one God, and religions are like languages, paths to reach God. Some are Sikh, some Muslim, some Hindu, some Christian. And so if we're unable to grasp the big picture and go beyond a superficial, surface level understanding of his desire for unity and peace, we're not going to see this. But if we do some due diligence and practice some evangelical integrity and be responsible and seek discernment, this is what he means by his acceptance and by his quest for unity and shared humanity and brotherhood, even. So, yeah, it's
those terms are just too generic anyway. Like brotherhood, unity. I don't know if too many theological leaders or pastors around the world would say, "I hate brotherhood. I hate unity."
Yeah.
We don't want that. So if we want to celebrate brotherhood and unity, okay, but then we have to define it, obviously. And how it was defined by Pope Francis is totally antithetical to how, an evangelical gospel preaching church would define unity and brotherhood. So again, these generic terms are not helpful. Like Leo said, with everyone, we can, and of course we can learn from some, everyone, I guess, in a sense, but not in the way that people mean when they talk about Pope Francis.
Good. Well, do we have anything else we need to add before we conclude this episode?
I don't think so. I mean, it would be interesting if our listeners, may agree or disagree or have extra questions about it or comments about it. It'd be interesting to hear how people are thinking about it in different parts of the world and wrestling through things or conversations they have with people. Yep. So please feel free to write us or disagree with us or challenge us or whatever.
Absolutely. And you can do that on social media. We want to say thanks to Selena Brown, who's doing a fantastic job managing our communications and our social media content. You can find us on Facebook at Reformanda Initiative, on X at Reformanda Rome. We're also on Instagram now, Reformanda Initiative. Check out our website, www.reformandainitiative.org. And as we conclude, I just want to encourage you to maybe check out the Gospel Coalition's website, where you'll find Leo's article on Pope Francis and some information on his legacy. Until next time from Rome, God bless.